Right. I've been researching steamboats since, I suppose, I was a youngster. And it started off as just to see a few photographs in books, one thing and another. And there's one or two photographs that everybody has probably seen. And I thought, well, there must be more than two boats in Lough Erne, like, you know. So it was a fascinating thing I found out about the history. I'll just sort of touch on it tonight, very basically. When did it start? Why were there steamboats in Lough Erne? And why Lough Erne? Well, it's very simple. In the Industrial Revolution, really started the whole thing, the introduction of steam engines, steam power, changed everything, factories, mills, quarries, and coal mines. Steam engines were in Ireland in the mid to late 1780s, or I think maybe before that. 1784, there was one in a colliery outside Coal Island. And it was no time after that they introduced steam at the boats, obviously, and mechanised everything. The first steamboat in Ireland was built in Cork in 1815 by Andrew Hennessy. It was called City of Cork. And it was shortly after that the government wanted to sort of simplify the haulage and trade of all sailing ships had to go around the coast of Ireland, in the west coast of England. You had to go either north or south, and thought there must be some easier way. So decided that there's canal building was going all over Britain and Ireland. The Newry Canal was built in the 1700s, I can't remember the exact date. The Grand Canal, the Lagan Canal from Belfast to Lough Erne, and they thought, well, the easiest way to the west would be through Lough Erne, so they decided they're going to build a canal from Lough Erne to Lough Erne that would connect to the west and eventually onto the Shannon, down the Shannon, the Grand Canal to Dublin, so you have a water network through all of Ireland. The Ulster Canal, it was surveyed originally in 1815 or 1816 by John Canally, who was involved in the Shannon schemes. The Ulster Canal Company was started in 1825, and the construction of the canal started in 1834 outside the Moy. And in 9 years, 1832, it opened in May, so that all excavated by hand in 9 years. So it was quite a feat to be done like with manual labour. William Dargan was the engineer who done most of the work, and he introduced the first boat, the first steamboat to Lough Erne. That was launched on the 23rd of December 1842. Countess of Erne. That's a slightly later advert from July 1845. But it was launched in 1842. It was originally a ferry in Portaferry to Strangford. And 1839, 1840 it moved to Belfast. Early 42 it was moved to Lough Erne. And then Dargan thought, well, the canal's open, so we need a boat. So just took it apart again and took it down the Ulster Canal, towed by horses, rebuilt it at Wattle Bridge, and it was launched on the 23rd of December. It's amazing what they did. And the first trip was on the 23rd of December to Enniskillen, and they went to Lisnaskea first, went to Crum, picked up the Crum band, went to Lisnaskea. They ran aground because in the winter time, obviously there was floods, a lot more than they are now, so I'll explain that later on. And they ran aground several times, so they had to stay at Lisnaskea overnight on the first trip at the Lockhead Quay, which was built for the Ulster Canal traffic, as well as the big quay at Belturbet. There was no actual quay in Enniskillen at that time as such. There was a canal terminus, they called it, which was on the end of Henry Street on this side of the West Bridge, not at the Brook, which everybody thinks. But this was the first trip, I think, yeah, the first official one. 1845, 2 shillings per person. But that boat had quite a short life. It caught fire at Belturbet in June 1846. There was some sort of a infestation of vermin, and at that time the only way of getting rid of vermin was like some chemical, like I think it was prussic acid or something they used. And of course prussic acid in a hot temperature and exposed to water is quite volatile, and June 1846 was the hottest summer on record, so it just burst into flames and sunk outside Belturbet.
I've heard that story before.
That's actually what happened. Now, this is one of the most photographed boats on Lough Erne. It's the Lady of the Lake in that stage, and as you can see here, this stone and concrete jetty was, I think that's the same one that your photograph included, Joan. That's at Castle Caldwell. Now you can see that from Castle Caldwell's on the other side. If you're the jetty at Castle Caldwell and look straight across, if you look through the weeds, you'll see this sort of a straight line. Well, that's that there. It's exactly the same now. I've taken a photograph of our boat in the same position, and it looks like an ant, you know, compared to that. That's the boat was built down in front of Fred's house at Rosclare on the shore. Irvines, of course. It was called the Rosclare, 96 feet long. I think it was built in London originally. It was in Stockwell, somewhere in East London, and it was taken over in sections and from Belfast or whatever, excuse me, on the railway to Enniskillen, and then carted out to Rosclare and rebuilt. That's 1866. That's an example of the class of paddle steamer on Lough Erne at that time, the big boats. That was by no means the biggest. The biggest was the Devonish and the fastest. And the Devonish was built in 1862 at the bottom of Market Street or Market Place, whatever you call it. It was built there on like a wooden frame and slid down onto the river there, the East River. It was 131 feet long, and they said it could carry 1,000 passengers or 800 with ease, but it was only licensed to carry 590 something, I think. But they just packed them on, basically. It was quite a fast boat, because it could go from like Enniskillen to Belleek in 2 hours and 15 minutes. You know, it was, and that's both ways, against the current. It was only like a 5-minute difference. And it's like only what you call a 50 horsepower engine now, but I did a lot of research, and Henderson and Colborne from Scotland, who built the Devonish, they used a really up-to-date modern type of steam engine. It was called an oscillating engine. If anybody knows anything about steam engines, basically, well, the cylinders and everything was on like a sort of a hinge, and the crank pins of the engine, the whole thing went round, you know. The whole mechanism, the body of the engine actually moved with the movement of the crank. And they were a high-speed engine. And there was quite a few boats at that stage. There was the Devonish. The first real passenger steamer after the Countess of Erne was built by J.C. Bloomfield at Castle Caldwell. It was the Countess of Milan, 1855. It was a big boat. It was about 110 feet, but it was, at that time, you see, you have to understand, it was sort of a novelty. Most of the boats at that time were only used in the winter time or later part of the year when the water was higher with floods, because there was no control over Lough Erne waters until the 1880s drainage scheme. I mean, people talk about the loch being lowered, but technically it wasn't lowered, it was prevented from flooding, because the loch level now is exactly the same as it was in 1836 when Wolfe and Beachy did the survey, because I have the figures to prove it. It's within a foot. But anyway, the Countess of Milan ran aground. There was a rapids at Sportora. It was a problem right up from the 1830s, 1840s, 1850 schemes, and right to the 1880s and 1890s. There was always a lot of excavation work going on there. This is the Belturbet. Now, up until the late 1860s, most of the traffic was in the lower loch. Like the big paddle steamers, you had Countess of Milan, the Devonish and the Rosclare, and there was another boat called the Pride of Erin, but there's no details of it at all, other than it appeared in 1859, and that was it. So there's no more mention of it anywhere. This is the Belturbet. It was the second boat of John Porter from Belle-Isle, and he tried for many years to get a boat on the upper loch. So he just basically went on ahead and bought his own boat. And the original boat he had was called the Knockninny, about 70 feet long, and what they call propellers, a screw steamer, twin screw, and there's a report in one of the contemporary newspapers of the testing from the lower lock, and they could go full ahead and full astern on either engine individually, like you can do with a twin steer now, you know, and without using a rudder, they could just spin the boat right around the circle. This was 1868, and I thought, this is great. You know, and there's a story of it going down to Castle Caldwell and coming back towards Rosclare, straight across the Broad Loch. It was so rough that somebody was sitting having a chicken dinner, and the whole lot landed on the deck. So they thought, oh, just keep going. You know, so nothing has changed. The Belturbet, it was licensed to carry 174, and as you can see, it did all the time. Just packed them on. And there's fantastic stories in the old papers of the parties going from Belturbet to Balleek and Enniskillen and Castle Caldwell, and they're just full of people. And it's amazing. There's pages and pages in the Reporter and different Enniskillen Chronicle. Now the drainage. This is a sort of a, I don't know, a bone of contention with a lot of people because nobody actually understands what happened. You know, everybody says, "Oh, the drainage, the lock was lowered." No. There was a survey done 1836, Wolfe and Beachy, they were Royal Navy lieutenants, and they scanned the whole lock, sounded the lock. I have maps at home, and literally every couple of yards there was a sound. And it's accurate to within inches of today's like satellites, or what G was talking about, different types of sonars. The most accurate, say, I forget the name of them offhand, there's a Gen 7 or HD7 or something used, and I've used them. They're fantastic images and depths, and we've done stuff along different parts of the loch. It goes from maybe 10 foot, 13, 25, straight into 60, 80, 90 feet of a gorge, and then it comes back up again. This is all on the map in 1840, and today it's nothing has changed. The drainage scheme, it was more or less to aid the navigation of boats and to alleviate flooding. Joe was talking about their families, the sailing we're on now. And if you look at old maps, but you have to remember when the map was drawn on the chart, it'll show islands and say 1860, and it's a wee tiny thing. Oh, when you think, oh, it's 2 acres, and then 1880 or 1890, it could be a lot bigger. There's more ground, which people would suspect obviously the water was lowered. That's true to a certain extent. The water was lowered because it wasn't mapped during a flood period. Wolfe and Beachy did soundings on the loch in January 1840 and May, and there's 9 feet of difference. 9 feet at Belturbet, 7 feet at Kerry Bridge, 4 or 5 feet I think it was Ross Tower, maybe 6 foot in Enniskillen. You imagine 6 foot of water here, you know. But that got into the public thing of the loch was lowered. No, it was prevented from flooding to the previous flood levels. And this is the Lady of the Lake again. Now this is a later photograph, probably 1890s. But at this stage, the railways were everywhere from 1860s onwards. Into the 1880s, they were into all the little towns around Cavan and all their small towns in Fermanagh. And that was basically the end of the big heyday of the steamers. And the canal was overgrown. So you see canals now, or rivers. I mean, look at the East River. You know, you look over to the hospital. There used to be like a canal sort of going in the way around the back. There was a spool mill in there. McNeil's, I think it was called. And you read about the output of spools. They made spools for like factories all over Britain and the world. Huge output. They had boats, steamboats getting in and out of there. I mean, you couldn't get in there in a canoe now. Right. It just shows you how overgrown. I mean, it's just like a seasoning thing. But the canal, the Ulster Canal, was basically a weeded hole the whole way. But this boat now, exactly. Oh yeah, right. This had such a colourful history. It was originally the Rosclare, and then in 1896 the Lough Erne Steamboat Company took over. It was refitted out of Pretoria. If anybody's familiar with Pretoria, you know, you used to keep the boats, Gene.
Was that dry dock?
Yeah,
That's where we
that was a
used-
dry
that's where
dock.
people
That dry
now-
dock was built.
For that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
huge thing. You
That's
just
what
say,
they-
I will build a dry dock. You know,
That's where the skin people used to learn to swim.
That's
That's
right,
right.
yeah. well, that's where that was refitted. The Workman's Ark, I think it was from Belfast, came down. It was an awful undertaking at the time, you know. They refitted it with new engine or machinery and one thing and another, new paint job, and it was relaunched, reinvigorated as the Lady of the Lake, which everybody knows as now. There's quite a few photographs on the internet and in books, you know. Everybody says the Lady of the Lake, you know, and you think that's it. There was like 10 or 12 big passenger steamers on Lough Erne and at least 25 commercial boats. Now, and like maybe twice as many private yachts. The upper lock, like Gabriel there, he'll tell you, like, heard stories of from his father's time and way back. Some of the families had 2, 3, maybe 4 steam launches. You know, there was dozens of them. You know, there were like cars, they were everywhere. Now, that boat in 1920, 1921, it was bought by a lady called Hazel Laverton. Anybody's heard of her? Yeah? Yeah. Good. She was renamed the Pandora, and she was converted to propeller, or I always refer to it as screw propulsion, because it was originally called the Archimedean screw. So, a screw steamer, but it wasn't a steamer. They took the whole steam machinery out of it, and I think it was a petrol or a paraffin engine. But anyway, in May and June of 1922, Laverton was used about her own private use. Pardon?
Was it Mrs. Lowry or Laverton?
Laverton. I think it's Laverton.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Before.
Oh, Hazel Laverton, yeah.
The last
Oh, she was West originally, but she married Laverton, I think, and then he politely, what's the word, he just went away and left her. So she decided, oh, I've got my little boat and I'm going to go up and down the loch, you know. So she did, basically, she just messed about up and down the river. Now, 1922, there was quite a bit of turmoil in this country for one reason or another, and she was a staunch, you know, anti-Free State and all this thing, you know, but that's her own stand. Now, in May and June 22, if anybody knows any local history, there's a thing called the Belleek and Pettigo Triangle.
Yeah.
Between Belleek and Pettigo, and sort of went like that. And now and you're closed in from Donegal on one side, and on the other side is Lough Erne. So the British Army thought, you know, coming from Enniskillen or Benmore, how are we going to help these people in Belleek and Pettigo and Mahernamina Castle? The A specials were there. The only difference in the A specials and the B specials is the A specials used the Crossleys and then the B specials preferred the Lancia for some reason. But the Lancia was all built by Irish Catholics. You didn't know that at the time. But no, Laverton was going down, and she was quite a character. She used to walk about, you know, dressed with a slouch hat and a revolver, you know, and this, and walk around the deck of the boat. The Battle of Pettigo, the A specials went to try and basically red Pettigo out of it and make a pad and clear the road to get back to the north, but they were defeated by the IRA defenders, chased back to Mahernamina Castle, and they stood a defence for a while, but they basically thought, oh, this is getting too hot. So they ran down to the shore, basically, and who was there? Laverton. Oh, you know, and she sent a wee boat, rowed out to save these boys, and the men were shooting at her with rifles, and she had the revolver out, you know, bang, shooting away. Wild character. She did happen to get the guys off and evacuated them and took them to safety. Now, that was late May. In early June, there was another big battle at Belleek when the British Army bombarded Belleek with cannon fire and the thing and all. And Laverton was back again with the Pandora again. So that was a sort of the finale of it, was at Belleek when she brought troops down as well and freed Belleek from the NRA. And after, I think it was the mid or late 20s, Laverton moved away down to Clare, where she came from. The boat lay about for years, I think the round O possibly,
No.
and it ended up over at...
It was moored opposite the point of the police station
Yeah,
on the corner grade side,
I know.
and that's where it was. It was.
I was just about to say that.
It
I know, it's actually, I know. But this is, but hold on a minute, this is in the late 20s. They moved it from there to where you said, yeah. And it sat there in 1950, was 56, I think, 57. And it was stripped because there's photographs.
Youngsters would go down and climb up the little ladders. But was that where the batten down? We couldn't get it in.
I know, it was just left there. But it was sort of stripped of anything useful, and then it eventually was cut up for scrap. But I can't remember. Somebody from Irvinstown or Roma probably was. I just think they just came along and took it away. Now, this is the last of the steamers, the Wide Awake, right?
Oh, right.
Now, anybody knows anything else, correct me if I'm wrong. I couldn't find out exactly roughly when it came here. John Lemon owned it. Now, it was built in Scotland, in Glasgow in 1850, and it's what was known as a dumb barge. It was just like an iron barge for towing. There was no machinery, no engines in it or anything. And it was used in London for quite a long time. But it's been mentioned in the 1890s, used as like a flag boat at some of the regattas in the lower Lough. And I found evidence one day myself, searching the islands, Kearney Island, if anybody knows it, you know the spike, right? You look at the spike. Yeah, whatever you want to call it, that's some area road, John. But if you look at the spike,
Liars Island as well.
whose name's on the spike?
Lennon.
Yeah, John Lemon, right? And there's a date on the top stone, I think it's 1887, something like that. So I presume maybe they had that at that time and they lifted the big stones on it, whatever, with the derrick. I don't know, but it's just a guess. But in 1894 it was mentioned in the paper as a flag boat of the regattas in the lower Lough. The last people that actually used it, I think, were Atchison and Johnson, or Johnson and Atchison. They were like timber, they drew timber down the Lough and used them at, I think it was the Brook or something. There's a photograph, an aerial photograph showing the boat and what's left of it. And there's another barge with it, I'm not sure, it could be the Poolbeg, I don't know, to be quite honest.
Yeah, it's at that Lough house in the Reeves.
Oh, I know where it is. Oh, yeah, I know. It's a disgrace, but what do you do? Of course, the Lough's full of boats. I know, and I've seen them in Eugene's seen them and know where they are. But that there is the last example. Sorry?
Right.
Joan, yeah.
I don't want to do too much, but it loaded up with timber on the islands. They cleared quite a few of the islands in the 40s and 50s.
That's right.
And they would bring the timber up on the Wide Awake. And our nickname for it was the Dead Asleep.
Dead Asleep.
It moved that slowly.
Oh, yeah, upper slow.
See it moving.
Yeah.
And then it was unloaded there, and you're right. I think it was Atchison. But I feel that Kidneys up Belfast now, I think they might have had it at the very end.
I don't know, because there was an auction.
Because the sawdust and everything else from the mill, just behind where McNulty's pub was, the West Bridge, now the lock-in.
That's right.
And they used
that was Lemon's Yard was there.
Was a dump where the lovely round old park is now.
Right.
That was a town dump.
Well, that's very interesting. I'll tell you why it was slow, if anybody knows any of its steam engines. See this, the tank of the boiler, right? The fire or the grate was round the back and went up through the middle. That's called a haystack boiler, right? That's very old design and inefficient. It would have been total scrap even when it was put into the Wide Awake. It was just stuck into it to move it out of the road. And as you say, speed, it would have just barely moved. But I think Atchison and Johnson would have been the last maybe to use it. And I don't know exactly, probably late 50s, early 60s, it was driven or towed round to where it is now. And I mean, I can remember being in school, and it was almost completely, you could see the whole boat out of the water easily. I remember seeing the boiler, the gauges, the whistle, everything. Now you can see practically even the winches under the water. Now, 1850, an iron boat has probably just collapsed in a heap, because there's boats in the upper Lough, Gabriel tell you, on Traston Island, a lot, maybe 50, 80, 90 years younger, and they're just rusted right through at the water line, like paper. So that boat it's just collapsed on itself, and it's just going to lay there forever. But other than that, that's really all I can tell you without going into too much crazy detail. It started 1842 and ended about the 1890s, around the First World War. Most of the boats were cut up for scrap for the war effort. The only one that survived intact for any use is the Wide Awake, which was the most unglamorous piece of junk on the loch, you know, and there was no paddle steamers left, and there's nothing, just this old thing. So that's a good way to finish, because Peter Taylor and John Taylor and Anne's grandfather, John McManus, I think, John, I had to check with John, I think he's in the background, I believe that's John there, possibly. I'm not, that could be John Lennon, or Jack Lennon or something, I'm not sure exactly. But is there anything else anybody notices in that boat? Any keen A's among you, no?
Flag.
No? See the flag?
Yeah.
Yeah? Well, it was in a clearer photograph, you can actually see there's 3 colours in that flag.
What?
Now, that's what they call the Lough Erne flag. The everybody goes around their cruises, I've got a Lough Erne flag. Well, the steamboats had them long before you, pal. And they weren't blue and white and green, they were green and white and blue. Now, everybody flies them upside down for some reason, I don't know. So,
You're told it's the water that started along.
well, I know, but everybody thinks that, but the ground, and then there's the water. You know, they presume the blue was for the water. What's the flag? The Sierra Leone flag? The Sierra Leone flag's the same. That's the one I fly on the shore. Because why would I give £25? There's some crowd up here for a flag. When you can get a Sierra Leone one for £3 off eBay. And it's the same colour. Aren't you? Allegedly. So that's about it, really. Questions? Sorry?
Went the wide way.
57 was told around.
Around the
1957.
57, some in the late 50s.
And it was sunk within weeks.
Just filled
And
in
apparently they
water.
said that, you know, you could, somebody had a light in the middle of it, and you could see daylight with a light shining through it. It was that bad.
Oh, aye. But it's completely
Sank
collapsed
within
now.
months.
Oh, aye. I remember Eddie Lunny. He
Yeah.
basically, it just filled with water, and
Yeah.
everybody thought it was rain, but it mightn't be that much. Obviously, it seeped into it. But you could see it quite plainly, you know, for a long, up until relatively recent, maybe 20 years. It's just basically collapsed now. It's gone, completely scrapped.
Brian, who brought the Devonish to Lough Erne, and how can we get one back?
Sorry? Who brought it to Lough Erne?
Yeah, who was responsible for bringing the boat to that size? How did it come about?
It was a Lough Erne steamboat company. There was various ones, Lemon and older Lemon and different ones. I can't remember off the top of my head. There were different businessmen around the town.
Was it one of the ones that were built here?
Oh, I think they were all built here. I mean, it had to be, sure, they couldn't lose them. They came in bits, but they were built originally wherever they were from, and then it's broken down. Or we used to say CKD, you know, completely knocked down. And the Devonish, it was built. Henderson and Colborne in Scotland, Renfrewshire or something like that, I think, off the top of my head. Came in bits, Market Yard, and there's this, it's all in the old papers in the microfilm. Talks about the racket of them, you know, riveting, big forges, and they had great equipment. Like even the drainage scheme in the 1880s, the machinery they had, like this image of people, you know, doing everything in their bare feet with spades is complete nonsense. They had steam cranes, they even set up railway lines on the bed of the loch. There's photographs of the loch dammed off, and the whole underneath of the West Bridge is dry. I'd like to see them doing that now. You couldn't do it. How would they do it? Take 1,000 men in yellow coats, 50 years writing bits of paper. Maybe we'll do it on Wednesday. No, it's not going to happen. But the Devonish, there's an interesting story of how it was taken away. There's 2 versions, but I honestly don't know. There's no point in me saying it. People said it was taken to Blake and stripped and taken away in the railway. Somebody else said it was taken to Blake and hauled out of the water on wooden frames and taken to the sea on carts and all this crack. But it's highly, highly unlikely. And even if you got it out of the water, it would just shake itself to bits, you know. And how would you get it into the sea in Blake or Ballyshannon? You know, it would just smash in bits. But there's an interesting bit. However it got to Belfast, the first, right, go back to the beginning. The first steamer in Lough Erne, the Countess of Erne, was originally called the Lady of the Lake when it was Portaferry. It was built in 1836 by Alexander MacLean in Belfast. When the Devonish was taken to Belfast in 1869, where did it go? Alexander MacLean's yard. It was renamed the Lady of the Lake and ended up in the west coast of Africa. It was involved in the Ashanti War, and I think in the 1960s, somebody from Enniskillen actually seen the remains of it on wherever it was, wrecked on some river or inlet somewhere along the African coast. So there's just so much rich history, and like the different types of engines that were used, and some of them, and the speed of them, it's amazing. They used to race each other. The Ross Clare and the Devonish, at the time of the regattas. The Ross Clare was primarily like a private yacht that brought their friends from Enniskillen to Ross Clare Hotel, and the Devonish was like a cargo boat. It did everything. There was one instance, there was some linen factory or shirt factory or something in Derry, came down on an excursion to Lough Erne. It was an excursion ticket, you could buy a ticket on a railway on a trip on the loch and back home again for like whatever it was, maybe £1 or something. It was a huge holiday. There were so many people landed at Pretoria to get on the Countess of Milan in 1859. There was 400 people, I think something like that, a whole train full. And they thought, what are we going to do now? Oh, great idea. Where's them cattle boats? And the tide, I think there was 3 big barges on behind the boat and stuffed everybody into. There's 400 people way down the loch. Castle Caldwell stuffed themselves with tea and sandwiches in Bloomfield's museum, and back to Enniskillen had a big dance in the courthouse. Or not the courthouse, the tower. Town Hall. Aye. So
these boats are not just for travel, they're social thing.
They're
Trips, they're day trips,
well, some of the bigger ones would have been originally.
Yeah.
You see,
those ones with 500 and 800 people on them.
but that was only one boat now, really. Well, it was primarily just the thing. It was basically, if you can do it, do it. You get the biggest boat you can, stuff it with people. But some of the stories in the papers are amazing. You can just imagine. It's like this. Well, obviously not the boat was in Belfast for 5 months. They sailed up and down. The Belturbet. That one, right? For years, you're talking 1880 to maybe 1905, 1910. That boat went from Belturbet to Balleek for maybe 2 or 3 times, 4 times a week, and his sister boat, the Knockdinny.
But that must have been commuting people from the west coast or wherever in land or back.
Not so much commuting. No, you remember there's the railways. They were just basically, look at the people that's on them now. They're all dressed. You know what I mean? It was just basically.
The railhead wasn't the Hobbit.
Yeah.
The railhead, anyone coming from Dublin.
That's right.
Aye. And then we got the boat.
The boat, aye.
Well, maybe commute's not the right word, but they were using it to travel.
Oh yeah. But in the later stages now, before the railway, it would have been used for commuting a bit. Not so much now, but not on the lower loch now. There was no steamboats on the lower loch until 1868, remember, other than the one, not the Countess of Erne, the following, the boat that came to replace it was called the Active, came from Belfast. It's another big long story. The Ulster Canal locks were, the narrowest lock was 11 but 8 inches or something wide down at Wattle Bridge, and I think it was 60 feet long. Now, the boat that came to replace the Countess of Erne was 68 feet long. How did he get it through the lock? There was a thing, I think it was a man called William Watson. There was a section you could remove off the back of the boat. There were steel hull boats, and they just bolted them together, basically jigsaw, and they could pull the back off the boat or the front or whatever. Some of them had the propellers in the front. Yeah, they were very smart thinking people at that time. Just cut the back off the boat, and the steered from the front as well. Yeah, the rudder and the screws at the front. Left the whole back open, like a barge. Very advanced thinking people. They could take the back off the boat, drive it through the lock, and then drag the tail of it through and reattach it on the other side of the lock. And people used to always ask, how come the Ulster Canal locks were so narrow? But it's basically, to cut a long story very short, or a very long story short, there was very little water supply to the Ulster Canal. Ulster Canal was a summit canal, which basically means, and you just know what a summit canal is. There's the two termini of the canal, and the middle of the canal is higher. It's a summit. That's where the water comes from, right? Because there's no way of pumping water up. They had to get it from the highest point. And where does water go? Naturally, downhill. You see, so the middle of the canal was always a struggle to keep it water in the summertime. That's why they made the thought, well, if we make it really narrow, it'll take less water. So they had to rebuild all the boats less than 11 feet. The Lough Erne boats, the Belfast boats and the Newry boats were 12, 15 foot wide. Even the ones in the Ballinamore Canal, which isn't, everybody talks about a canal. It's not a canal, it's just a wee bit of canalised bits between a couple of lakes. And that's where the zebra mussels came from too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know, of course it is. Yeah.
No starters or
But anyway, no.
The original
One last question, and then we.
Yeah.
They originate in the Caspian Sea.
Right,
Zebra mussels.
right. Yeah, so, yeah.
Harry, do you know anything about the fruit bag, or?
Not,
Just
just out of
the
the,
sistership of Winery, is it, or?
oh, not at all, no. Just the top of my head, the pool bag was
Is it sailing boat by any chance?
a sailing boat.
Yeah.
No, I think it was a launch built for the Royal Navy or something, as far as I remember. I've seen the plans of it, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
It was McQuillan, you say. I remember I when she was hauled up with the.
That's the Endeavour. Oh, that's a different boat, wasn't it?
No, pool bag as well.
Yeah. Right.
And we were converting her to having a second boat alongside the Endeavour. And it was the William Senior, who had died just at that stage, but the son was doing it.
Henry.
And he renovated the pool bag. And the pool bag is not actually as it was. There's extra freeboard, with more planks on her. And there was wheelhouse and all on her.
Yeah.
Back in those days. And then when he died, 20 of them then, fortunately, and things.
That's interesting. I don't know. I'm not sure.
So
But it seems to be.
there is some history for that could be done into, I think.
Yeah, I know. I think, as far as I know, it started off as a naval, some sort of a launch or a yacht. Because I remember one of them, Ken Wilson, had the plans and a bit of history of it. You know, it could be Southampton or Portsmouth or somewhere. Springs to mind, but I'm not 100% sure there or not.
Right. On that note, I think we'll have to bring it to a close. If the tide goes out any further, we'll not get the cross.